There was a pretty decent mix of established receivers underperforming and new names emerging in emphatic fashion in week 1. Let's get into what that means for the wide receiver rankings in week 2, which starts right now. Quick caveat, we obviously are not including Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, AJ Brown, and Devonta Smith, with this video being made Thursday night and coming out Friday. I just moved apartments, so my schedule will be fixed soon. Tyreek Hill leads us off. He comes off a week where he tied for the most targets among wide receivers with 15 of them. He drilled into a Chargers secondary that struggled all year last year. 215 yards with 9 catches for at least 20 yards. This is an absurd stat line. Hill thrived in week 1. When this Dolphins team is healthy, and I mean fully healthy, I will put them up against anybody in the league, and I know they'll be able to keep up. Tua Tagovailoa chucked the ball 45 times, averaged over 10 yards per attempt, and Hill benefited from this good old-fashioned high-scoring matchup. Jamar Chase against Baltimore. I'd say it's fair to chalk what we saw against Cleveland up as a week 1 performance. What I mean by that is unprecedented scenarios, and the fact that it was a divisional matchup does not help. Drake London had no catches. Dallas Goedert was invisible. If you thought 5 receptions for 39 yards with Chase was bad, go take a look at T. Higgins, because he got 0 receptions as well. Chase showed growth in production from year 1 to year 2, and if he played a full season in year 2, he would have easily outdone his rookie year across all fronts. Obviously, having his college teammate in Joe Burrow be his quarterback helps a ton, and hey, Chase drew in the most targets with 9 of them. The catch rate, obviously for most receivers on Sunday with Cincinnati, was just a bit below average. He was 5 for 9. We move on and have Stephon Diggs, mostly because of the fact that he's got a nice matchup against the Raiders secondary. Now, yes, they only allowed 166 passing yards in their week 1 victory against Denver, but that was against quite literally the lowest scoring offense in the league from 2022. I have Diggs here for this matchup because even in honestly one of the worst offensive performances we've seen from Buffalo in a while, the man put up an easy 10 catches for 102 yards and a touchdown. We had Josh Allen throwing into double and triple coverage. Jordan Whitehead alone had 3 interceptions, and the Bills put up just 16 points. That would have been the lowest scoring performance for that team in 2022. With all of that considered, Diggs still finished as the wide receiver 4. Let's round out the S tier with someone who cracked the top 5 in 2022, but couldn't do a whole lot last week because Dallas didn't really need to throw the ball. They won 40-0. The Cowboys had a 3-possession lead before halftime and never looked back, so Lamb only ever had 4 targets, albeit he turned that into 4 catches for 77 yards. Not to mention, 3 of those catches were for first downs in critical situations. Lamb played in just 79% of snaps due to the fact that this game was over really before it started, so I'd argue he's got some fresh legs for week 2. This one's going to come down to whether or not Dak Prescott can stay disciplined. He threw for a career-high 15 interceptions last season and lost offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, and now he's got to play the Jets, who just picked off Josh Allen not once, not twice, but 3 times. Calvin Ridley kicks off the 8s here, and I'll happily admit that while I stayed cautious and didn't go out of my way to draft him in too many leagues, it's great to see he hasn't missed a step since a couple of years ago. He was targeted in the red zone twice in week 1, racked in a touchdown pass, had a team target share just above Tyreek Hill, but just below Davante Adams at 34.4%. And overall, it was a nice day. Those are some nice names to be in company with. The over-under for the Jaguars and Chiefs is set at 51 points. I like the Jags' new number 1 option in a high-scoring battle. Without much hesitation here, he's at number 5. Let's cover the man who had the first touchdown of the season. It's Amon-Ra St. Brown. St. Brown had 2.29 yards per route run and was wide receiver 11 in fantasy scoring last week. Look, Seattle runs a lot of zone, and the slot receiver was 10th in target share against zone looks last year. St. Brown will likely face off against Artie Burns, who has allowed a 100.3 passer rating throughout his career. Davante Adams was not even the top targeted receiver in Las Vegas in week 1, as Jacoby Myers stole the show with a team-high 10 targets and a pair of touchdowns. I don't think that's a coincidence that both Myers and Jimmy Garoppolo were from the same system in New England and connected so well. Myers had 3 red zone targets to Adams' 1. Myers is likely out this week, though, considering he hasn't practiced through Thursday and took a nasty hit that led to a concussion, so I'm bumping Adams a bit up the list for that reason. However, he's facing a Bills defense that has allowed less than 20 points per game over the course of the last 2 years. It will be a tough day at the office for Adams. Brandon Ayuk comes in at number 8 against the Rams. Wow. We were talking about it all preseason, that Ayuk had a 1,000-yard season last year, is loved by many in the locker room for blocking 20 yards down the field on runs routinely, and had an opportunity to take over the wide receiver 1 spot in San Fran this year. Look, it may be early, but catching all 8 of his targets, hauling in both red zone targets for touchdowns, and finishing week 1 as the wide receiver 2 overall is not a bad start for Brandon Ayuk. I don't want to get premature and toss him into the top 5 overall because this 49ers team does have so many weapons. Also, Ayuk was third on the team in target share against zone with Purdy under center last season. This is a situation they'll face this week. Even with that being said, Ayuk capitalized on every chance he had in week 1, so let's sit tight and see. I've got him at 8. On to the beats here, we've got DK Metcalf against a Detroit defense that held their own, but definitely caught their fair share of breaks in week 1, with Travis Kelce being out and Kadarius Toney practically handing them an interception at one point. DK Metcalf himself had the best day of any Seahawks receiver with 3 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown, but this game was just odd. The Rams ran 78 plays to the Seahawks 44, so if you're going to sit back and try and tell me that Metcalf didn't have a great day without the touchdown, that's fine. But understand that he was working on an offense that failed to put up 200 total yards after being much more productive last season. Metcalf, JSN, and Kenneth Walker III all had 5 targets each. Geno Smith hardly threw for over 100 yards on the day, and look, if we see this offense stall for a second straight week, I'll get worried. But all I saw was DK Metcalf scoring 13 points in a fantasy PPR format on a tough day for the offense. Jalen Waddle is number 10 on the list after being severely out-targeted by Tyreek Hill by a count of 15-5 in week 1. Waddle had just 4 catches for 78 yards, but reminiscent of last year, he hovered around 20 yards per reception and maintained his breakout play reputation. His 38 yards after catch mark shows exactly why he's a top 10 wide receiver, and not like Marquez Valdez-Scantling in that Tua isn't always tossing him a 50-50 ball 40 yards down the field. He's letting him work in the open field. Waddle draws a matchup against a New England defense that's a bit banged up with Jack Jones on the IR. He was nursing an oblique injury early in the week, but Waddle should be good to go on Sunday night. Chris Olave is up next in his matchup against Carolina after putting on an electric show in the introduction to Derek Carr in New Orleans. He had 19.2 points in a standard PPR format in the opener and had an impressive 64 yards after the catch. That's the second highest mark in the league for week 1. Whenever a new QB is in town, it's a common question to wonder, how is the signal caller going to mesh with the wide receiver 1? Well, out of the 10 targets Olave had, 8 were catchable, and he racked in every single one. The two took it easy in week 1, as Carr and Olave averaged just 6 air yards per catch, but as we know, Olave did pretty well for himself, all things considered. At the time of this recording, so Thursday night, J.C. Horn is listed as doubtful. That makes me feel a lot better about Olave than I otherwise would have. At 12, it's one of the biggest buys in fantasy football right now. T. Higgins has been held to 0 catches twice in his career. On January 3rd, 2021, in his rookie year in a blowout loss against the Ravens, a very different Baltimore team from what they are now. And last Sunday, where he was targeted 8 times and caught none of them. Out of the 47 games Higgins has played, that unfortunate performance has gone down twice. He's averaged 1,000 yards per season and hasn't had to deal with the number 1 corner in man coverage in the last 2 years, thanks to Jamar Chase. Are you seeing all the green lights yet? The 6'4" monster will be just fine. And go throw a trade package together for him if you haven't already, because he's probably as cheap as he'll be all year. Keenan Allen led the receiving effort for the Chargers in a week 1 shootout where Los Angeles focused on the run game more than we've seen in a long time. 40 rushes for 233 yards and 3 scores on the ground? I'd argue it worked. Allen had 4 more targets than anyone else on Kellen Moore's offense with 9. The next closest was Austin Eckler with 5. Now he gets to face a Tennessee secondary that allowed 282 passing yards in week 1, the 5th highest mark in the league. There's plenty of competition for targets in LA, but I like what I saw with Allen. We obviously just need the 31-year-old to please stay healthy. I have Amari Cooper at the 14th spot in his matchup with the Steelers this week. The Browns really stuck to their identity in week 1 with 40 rushes to just 29 passes. And why wouldn't you do so with a guy like Nick Chubb in the backfield? As impressive as Amari Cooper is and was in Deshaun Watson's worst career year last season, Chubb will always be a prominent part of this offense as long as he's on the field. He set a career high with 298 carries last season and has averaged at least 5 yards per carry in every year of his career. Cannot stress enough how impressive that is. On top of that ceiling-limiting impact, which is Chubb, the new man in town in Elijah Moore tied Cooper in targets with 7 of them in his first week with the team. The betting line for this matchup is hovering just around 43 points, so get ready for an ugly contest. Now we have Garrett Wilson, someone who obviously had a dip in value with the season-ending injury of Aaron Rodgers being taken into account. The guy was 22nd among receivers in a standard PPR format last year. I personally had him just outside of the top 5 this year with Rodgers, considering that the QB room was horrible last year. I'll put him at 15 here against Dallas, considering him and Zach Wilson connected for a touchdown and on all 5 targets in week 1, so there's some chemistry there. Dallas's defense, as we already knew but were reminded of very promptly last week, is no joke. Wilson is going to need to get the ball out fast. Zach Wilson, that is. But at least New York has the whole week to prepare for a Zach Wilson game plan instead of like 5 minutes, which was the case in week 1. Chris Godwin leads off the D tier and will face off against a Bears defense that looked all types of confused in week 1. In Jordan Love's second career start, he threw for 245 yards and 3 touchdowns, while Chicago allowed the offense to convert on 56% of third downs. I don't think Baker Mayfield should have too much trouble in his 71st career start, second with the Bucs, and a much better receiving core at his disposal than Love had. Godwin caught all 5 of his catchable targets in week 1, and he had one of the 2 red zone targets on the team with Trey Palmer, who we said to watch out for this year with Russell Gage gone, being the other recipient, and he caught a touchdown. Godwin has more targets over the course of the last 2 years than Mike Evans, and in less games, so I'd give him low wide receiver 1 to high wide receiver 2 upside against Chicago this week. All of that considered, I have Mike Evans right behind Godwin. Evans was targeted more than anyone else on the team this past week with a mark of 10, but he caught only 6 of those while racking in a touchdown. Now, Mayfield is known for having a strong arm and showing it off, and Evans is more of the 50-50 ball option, if you will. Not much breakaway speed, but a big frame. And I'd say he sees about the same success as Godwin against that Bears secondary. 1,000 yards in each of the last 9 seasons is phenomenal. We do have trade rumors, and I think Godwin has a longer stay in this offense going forward. That's why I have them stacked the way I do. Hey, any guess on who had the best target percentage in the entire league last year? I'll give you a hint. His face just popped up on the screen. Zay Flowers racked in 47.6% of passes, actually tied with Robert Woods, oddly enough, but he had more efficiency and down the field work. 9 catches on 10 targets for 78 yards. But here's the caveat. He's operating in an offense that, unfortunately, once again, lost their star running back in J.K. Dobbins. Combine the success that Flowers and Lamar Jackson had in week 1 with an already bruised up backfield and a decent matchup against a secondary that no longer includes Jesse Bates and Von Bell in Cincinnati. And I like Zay Flowers. I like the situation that's brewing here. To start off the E tier, we will cover someone who had one of the largest question marks pinned to his name in DeAndre Hopkins. While it wasn't perfect, Hopkins got into the double digits for fantasy points and also led the way with 13 targets for a target share percentage just below 40. He now faces a Chargers secondary that was lit up like a Christmas tree last week against the Miami Dolphins. While I don't think this Titans team puts up nearly the passing output that one of the best offenses in the league in the Dolphins did, Hopkins looks sharp, is getting touches, and should make some noise. Puka Nacua was just fired out of a cannon. How about joining Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs as the only receivers with 10-plus receptions in week 1 for your NFL debut? I don't really see this as a situation that fizzles out much either. Don't expect the man to go out there and give you 20-plus points every week. But Cooper Kupp is presumably out for at least the next couple of weeks. The Rams' run game is so awful. 2.3 yards per carry is next level bad. He had 22 yards after contact, the greatest mark of any receiver in week 1 due to just sheer volume. But of course, he now plays against an extremely tough defense that just gave up 7 points to the Pittsburgh Steelers. San Fran is a 7.5-point favorite across most lines, so at the very least, I think the Rams will have to go pass heavy in the second half, and that's where Nacua can thrive. DJ Moore finishes out the eats here after a week where he just wasn't thrown to. He was targeted twice on 2 straight plays. He caught both passes and put up 25 yards, and then we never heard from him again against Green Bay. That's all she wrote. Yes, Jair Alexander and that secondary are no joke, but Justin Fields didn't even give the guy a chance. After the game, Fields acknowledged and took accountability for his lack of aggressiveness against Green Bay. He did only throw the ball over 10 yards through the air 4 times, but he draws a nice matchup this week against Tampa Bay, a unit that allowed 328 yards through the air in week 1. The Rams secondary is pretty different without Jalen Ramsey, and against his own defense, Deebo Samuel has historically seen more usage than Brandon Ayuk. I did project a downtick in production with CMC out there on the field, which we saw in 2022, and a bit last week with Ayuk outperforming the utility that is Samuel. But I still think anytime you have a multi-threat receiver like Deebo Samuel, you've got upside for sure. A 25% team target share is still solid considering he is competing with Kittle, Ayuk, CMC, and so much more. The Michael Pittman Jr. and Anthony Richardson connection went a lot better than we thought, or at least than I thought. Maybe Jonathan Taylor being out helped and pushed the fact that Anthony Richardson threw the ball 37 times in his debut, connected with Pittman on 8 of 11 targets, and targeted him in the red zone twice, converting for a touchdown on one occasion. Taylor won't be back for the next couple of weeks, so if that's the reason that Pittman is getting so much action, so be it. He plays a Houston team where the offense struggled and wasn't on the field a ton. In 24th, we have the wide receiver 2 in one of the most exciting offenses in the league, that is Christian Kirk. This is another receiver you can get at an extreme discount considering his lackluster performance in week 1. Obviously, Calvin Ridley stole headlines with his usage, but Christian Kirk is still a 1,000-yard wide receiver in the midst of a hefty 4-year contract with Jacksonville, and he's working with someone who was once the number 1 prospect out of high school, then college, and I'd argue he had a top 10 season in 2022 down the stretch and into the playoffs. We're referring to Trevor Lawrence. Spreading the ball around effectively to multiple receivers will be no problem with this caliber of talent under center. Kendrick Bourne is sneaking into this list. Who would have thought? This is not the Patriots offense of old. Bill O'Brien had Mac Jones throwing the ball 54 times. Bourne led the way with 11 targets. Jones had over 300 yards passing. We saw aggression on all fronts, and New England is obviously in a tough division in general, so they're going to have to keep up with a new brand of football to be competitive. 2 touchdowns on 6 receptions, oh yeah, and now he plays a Miami team that gets in scoring bouts on a weekly basis? Sign me up. Fringe players that just missed the list are Jahan Dotson, Tyler Lockett, George Pickens, Jerry Jeudy, and Mike Williams. Thank you for watching as always. Let me know if I missed anybody on this list in the comment section below. Feel free to like and subscribe if I helped you get better at fantasy football going into week 2, and we will see you in the next video.